Coming up, the New York Football Giants add a linebacker to their core. Bobby Okereke in the door. He's not the name that Giants fans were waiting for, but is he ultimately a player that can contribute and help Wink Martindale in this defense shore up the biggest area of concern against the run? Break it all down next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, wouldn't you know it, I am your host, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down not only the Giants, but also the Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast with Doug Norrie, also breaking down the New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. Mention coming soon, the Red Bulls podcast as well, Raging Red Bulls talking about MLS. So you can get me in any number of varieties, talking any number of sports. But what we're here to talk about right now is the New York Football Giants and the linebacker that they brought in on day one of free agency. Again, said at the top, not necessarily the player that we thought was going to be coming in for Big Blue. We saw some really big swings here. The Chicago Bears are making moves to make themselves a far more competitive team in the upcoming season. So it's hard if you're Joe Schoen, if you're the Giants, to overcommit or take big swings. But ultimately, they go out and get a guy who, maybe this isn't the first, second, third, or fourth player that you would have listed in terms of hierarchy. But Bobby, man, I'm going to do that with his name a couple of times. Bobby Okereke does bring, without a doubt, an elevated, improved skill set at a key position of need for the New York Football Giants. There's a couple of stats around him that are really good to look at, obviously, if we're thinking about how he can improve this team. One of which he wears actually rocked. I think he was rocking the Antonio Pierce jersey number. See what he comes in when he joins Big Blue. What are the things that we like about it before we talk about the contract specifically? He's entering his prime. 26 years old. So this is going to be the prime for him. It's a 4-year deal. We'll give you that much right here off the bat. And when you go in and look at the stats over these past handful of seasons, there's obviously plenty to like about what he accomplished in terms of being someone that the Giants can depend on, I think specifically on the inside of the linebacking core. So you can go and look depending on where he is. He's played on the right side, played in the middle. I think ultimately you like him being a guy that improves this run defense for the New York Football Giants behind Dexter Lawrence. Specifically, one of the things that obviously you use whatever metrics you can get here. There's two sides to this coin. So the first one is overall, PFF grade this thing out just to give a point of reference. 73.3 overall last season. His run defense is 79.3. His coverage defense is a 67.4. The worst aspect of his game is going to be that pass rush at 48.5. That's fine. Because the first thing that we wanted to address, if we're going to talk about free agency or the draft when it came to this defense, is the absolutely putrid run defense that they had been putting forth last season. Getting gashed with consistency, giving up 100, 150 yards per game on the ground. And it's difficult when you're talking about a player like Dexter Lawrence, who we're agreeing in season is having a phenomenal year, and yet we don't have enough players in behind him to really elevate what his value is. And that's simply saying, if he's occupying two in the middle, you need guys that can clean up those gaps, break down those runners in those holes, and not afford second, third down plays to go from being mid-range to being first down conversions. Want to put guys into third and longs, want to get into a Wink Martindale scenario where he can have his defenders, edge rushers, even cornerbacks, sometimes safeties, pin their ears back and get downhill after the quarterback and trust that pressure is going to get home. So that's the phase one for me, no matter which way you look at it. The other thing that we can talk about here, and we'll get into all the kind of, big stats here, et cetera. But from 2019 to 2022 with Indy, where he was drafted, here's what we have just in terms of what he can do in the coverage for you. He has improved. Now, flip-flop there his first 2 years, but 74, 78, 74, and then 70%, 0.7 completion percentage against when targeted in coverage. So he faced everything from 35, 61, 73, and then 82 82 targets as a defender over the middle there, 58 completions allowed. The yards per completion is high, almost 9. The yards per target is 6.3. So in terms of wrapping up, right? Wrapping up the receiver, the ball carrier out of the backfield, the tight end, whoever it's going to be, giving those extra couple of yards. So maybe there's something there we want to say he can clean up. 91 rating this past season when we talk about the QB rating coming across here. The biggest thing for me, for a guy who's 6'1", 235, so put it into context here. This is not a big boy who's coming in to plug the holes in a dam, right? This is going to be a player that you trust and rely on to play smart football, to attack once read and react, attack wherever that ball carrier or receiver is going to be coming from, and play sound, consistent football for you. I think that's for me, that's the number one here that I want to see from this player when he gets in here and plugs in. Then you think about where we are right now. And by the way, and I'll throw this up here too, if you're in on the chat, please join in on the conversation. We love to have everybody in here. This does not do any justice to what Bobby can do for the New York Football Giants, because this is the hybrid defender in the middle of this linebacking core that you want to be able to afford you what? Darian Beavers, rookie, coming off injury. Don't know where he's going to be. Got to wait and see. Going to go to the draft. Still going to bring in another linebacker to add to this group, you would assume. Going to be young. Going to have a learning curve here, right? Consistency is the first thing that we want out of this linebacking core. And beyond, as King's pointing out, beyond what that PFF grade tells you, what this player is capable of doing, because the speed, I want to pull this up. I think I had this right, but I do want to make sure that I had his 40 time accurate coming out of college. So when we look over here, and as we always, when we run these lives, there's going to be that mixed bag of timing, making sure we get some information right here. I had him in the 4.445 range, if I'm remembering correctly. And that means that he has sideline to sideline speed, right? That means that this is a player that if you're trying to attack from the right side, he's going to be able to play in run support. He's going to be able to pick up a tight end leaking off the line. He's also going to be able to read and react if it's going to be a play action fake in the backfield, if they're going to run a jet sweep. He can get himself back across to the other side of that line of scrimmage and help to clean these things up. The reason why I think it's productive inside of that role specifically is when we think about Kayvon Thibodeau, when we think about Ojulari getting back, being fully healthy, we know that's going to happen. We don't even have to doubt that he's going to be able to do that. 4.58 40 was his time coming out of college as well. Did a really nice job, though, in the 20-yard shuttle 4.26, going back to his time coming out in 2018. But the fact that, okay, the pass rush grade, and by the way, I don't necessarily worry about the PFF side of that and saying, here's a guy that only has, or was the least productive area of his game. Okay, but you need to be a cleanup role inside of this. And with enough speed like that inside of Wink Martindale's system, I don't have any reservations around the idea that his game in areas that you would consider to be one of the lesser attributes can get elevated, because you don't know what else is going to be happening across that defensive scheme that's going to afford him to play. By the way, a little bit of that Landon Collins kind of role last year, right? We bring in a veteran player, a player we're familiar with, used to be a safety. Now he's kind of a safety linebacker hybrid. I love the idea of having now Bobby be plugged in there and him be the one that's going to be moving around from side to side, providing different looks and giving you enough in coverage to say, tight end, I can pick him up with consistency. We said, too, the comparison when I was looking yesterday at his profile and thinking about him with the Indianapolis Colts, their defensive style drops guys back away from the line of scrimmage. So playing more of a prevent, especially over the middle there at times. So sometimes it can be misleading the way players get graded out, because you're looking and saying, well, the completion percentage is pretty high, or you're seeing 8 to 9 yards per completion when targeted. Yes. But what if I wanted to bump the tight end off the line of scrimmage and run with him in coverage for those? If I'm talking about putting pressure on the quarterback up front and then thinking about running backs out of the backfield, I need closing speed. I need someone who can get downhill and wrap up the running back coming out of the backfield on some of those swing passes over the middle, right? Reliability, consistency. And the other thing that you can think about when we talk about bringing in a player like this is how it can impact someone like Darian Beavers. Now, hard, given that we didn't get the sample size at all. We don't know what's going to happen with Ellerson Smith, hasn't been able to be on the field. But that profile, their athletic profile, their measurables, longer, rangier guys, but aren't necessarily Darian Beavers when he came out. Loved the draft pick, but also said he's a guy that's almost there as being sideline to sideline. Well, when you pair him with another inside linebacker there in the defensive front, you can say that your responsibilities get reduced. So can you play fast enough? Can you play downhill enough? Can you show that length and that range if you know that you have a reliable player alongside of you, right? We're a team that has been bringing in scrap heap linebackers to fill into our roles, guys that literally we're not on a roster. We're coming in and playing starting reps consistently over the last couple of years. So that's the big change here for me, bringing in Bobby Okereke, that I want to make sure I always get a little pause when I break it out there. He's also a guy, 17 games in 2022, 64 total for his career. Has 3 interceptions, by the way, if you just want to throw that into the old career numbers for him as well. It matters to have a floor. So the contract was $40 million. I get into those numbers here. $40 million over 4 years. I think there's a little bit of something incentives there as far as where the guaranteed money ends up going to. Now, it's interesting because you look around the league, you saw some way bigger contracts, bigger money that meant, okay, the Giants aren't going to be able to afford to reconnect with a Bills linebacker. We don't say their names if they're not on our roster. They may have wanted to. Some teams were going to look to take bigger swings. I don't look at this, though, the way some of it. So across like the spectrum, ESPN actually gave this like the worst grade out of the people that are covering this with a C-. Sports News, Pro Football Focus, The Athletic, Bleacher Report, all come in with B's or A's across the board. Walter Football as well. And if you're thinking about pulling out bleachers here, 26-year-old Okereke isn't without flaws, which is true. Like, this isn't the perfect linebacker. He's not a top 10 draft pick that's an all-pro that's going to Pro Bowls year in and year out. He left the field in passing situations at times in Indianapolis and has allowed over 70% of passes thrown in his direction to be completed in all 4 seasons. Again, you're taking him off the field in those situations because of the style of defense you're playing. Doesn't mean he's going to be perfect, but I think he can be far more functional on passing downs than maybe it would be indicated by the way he was used in Indy. But Okereke, as they go on to say here, has better range than anyone currently on New York's roster. Not a hard bar, but it is significantly better. And he's a ferocious run stuffer. In each of his last 2 years, he has topped 130 tackles, including a career high 151 last season. I saw some reports around this too, saying that this was, Blake Martinez kind of vibes coming from Green Bay. I disagree with that. I mean, I disagree with it from a number of different categories. If you want to sit here and tell me 151 tackles, high volume tackler, and that's the comp that you're making to Blake Martinez, okay, there's a stat category that fits in there. Blake Martinez didn't have any speed. Blake Martinez was a bigger guy, and I'm not even trying to knock him, right? Veteran player, a little bit on the older side, but stiff in the hips, not a guy that could do anything for you in coverage, was going to be someone that helped stop the run, that helped fill those gaps, but was far more one-dimensional in that regard than a player like Okereke, even if it's not the same level of expectation around any one individual category. So I think that's a very big distinction I want to make here. When you pull up stats, it's easy to say, well, this guy had 150 tackles, he had 63 solo, and you go down the list, and that's why they compare to a former player. Sure. But the reality is, as King says, more athletic than Blake, 1,000%. Again, 6'1", 235. Blake, I can't even remember what his weight was at, but I mean, 20 pounds heavier, couple inch or two taller, I think. And again, doesn't have the same range, doesn't have the same hip flexibility, doesn't have the same change of direction, doesn't have the same ability to get around the edge and get after the quarterback in blitzing situations, even if we don't think that's going to be one of his primary functions. This is a player that has a nice base of skills that's going to afford Wink Martindale to plug him in and say, we can use you for X amount of reps, X amount of time here, and then hopefully create benefits off of that. I need Dexter Lawrence to know that if I'm going to be occupied on double teams inside the interior of the defensive front, I want to know which way I want to move these bodies, not because I'm trying to just occupy them, not because I'm trying to get through and maybe get to the quarterback or get to the runner myself, but because I have reliability behind me. I have consistency behind me. One of the biggest things that I would say the difference for the Giants going forward here is building an understanding and a trust right up the middle of this field. So you talk about Dexter Lawrence in the middle. Now you talk about Bobby. Now you talk about Xavier on the back end, communicating as well with your cornerbacks. Obviously, you need to find a way to have consistency and reliability, because once one of those links in the chain either doesn't do what's expected of him or doesn't recognize what's supposed to be expected of him, right? And overcommits to one side, overcommits in coverage, those type of things. All of a sudden, the breakdowns go right down the fold there, right? You can see a pass over the middle for 15 to 17, 20 yards downfield and say, Xavier McKinney's really got to be up there closing that distance a lot sooner on the tight end. Okay, but if it's a Blake Martinez, as we're using him as the example, well, that's because Blake Martinez can't get 15, 20, yards downfield, except for that one highlight. I remember where he was down there breaking up a pass. But by and large, he couldn't do that. And that's about athleticism. Then there's about the IQ, the football IQ, and knowing how far should I drop, how close do I need to stay up to the line of scrimmage to make sure that I don't put my front three here in the 3-4 scheme. I don't put them in a bad spot. Where if I drop too far off the line of scrimmage, all of a sudden that gash run play that we saw so many times this past season, that's wide open because I have now dropped 15, 20 yards back in coverage trying to pick up the tight end coming off the line, trying to pick up maybe the wide receiver running a crossing route if we're working in a zone scheme. So passing off assignments is important too, especially inside of Wink Martindale's system, where at times we want to get after the quarterback with those high pressure situations. That means putting cornerbacks out in isolation and man-to-man coverage on the outside. Everything in the middle, everything over the top is the responsibility of pressure up front, consistency in the linebacking core, and reliability and potentially big playability on the back end for this defense. Tommy, how are you, sir? Much love to the panel and the Giants. Jones will host up the trophy, screaming out, "Y'all not entertained?" Okay, I did not know that. I did not know that was going to be the case. Just heard from the source. Jordan Poyer has a chance to be a Dolphin, is choosing between the Dolphins and the Chiefs. Yeah, so there's some other things that I want to get to here as well, just in terms of where things stand right now. This took a while, right? Giants didn't come out the gate making the big splash. The one thing that happened simultaneously over these last couple of days here, last 24 hours, would be what Joe Schoen has talked about, which is we're going to take care of some of our in-house guys, right? So we knew Sterling Shepard. We talked about that on our last episode. We mentioned Gerard Davis, talked about that. He had been with this team, obviously, long snapper Casey Kreider. So some of those guys. The most notable one, beyond Daniel Jones, obviously, and tagging Barkley. But the most notable one to me was Matt Breida. I was, saying it's surprised isn't necessarily the way that I want to frame this. I was surprised this past season when it came to Matt Breida and the fact that he just wasn't getting used as much as I thought that he could be. Now, there's big stretches over last year where you're looking at it and saying, Saquon Barkley's the bread and butter. We're keeping the offense very simplified as we're trying to introduce the new Kafka Daboll system. So we want to, mitigate some of the learning curve here, especially for Daniel Jones, right? We want to have him take that first step in a new system in a positive way. 22 total touchdowns felt like that. But when you look back at it, and he appeared in 17 games, 54 carries, 220 yards. I thought that this was going to be a guy, and I don't know how high I want to set that bar of expectation. But if you're talking about having even 3 carries a game across 17-game season, that's going to end up getting you close to what that number is, right? That puts you at 51. So maybe I just thought that 5 maybe, and maybe that's too lofty. This is an insurance policy for sure. Ran at 4.11 yards per clip. Didn't get used, though, for big stretches of this season. So a lot of this was volume for him in terms of when he was actually getting utilized. The other one for me, too, when we think about the receiving numbers, because I'm trying to remember, what was his snap count total here? Let's get a little look-see. His total snap count, he ran 264 snaps. It's not, it's 23%. So maybe I'm underselling it a little bit. Played 38% of special team snaps. So maybe I'm underselling what he did last year, even if I had a different level of expectations for him. In terms of bringing him back, I'm fine with it because it's just reliability. It's what Joe Schoen said about this is a guy, and he mentioned this, I think, when asked before the free agency period, maybe even yesterday. When you bring back a guy that you've had in-house already, you know the work ethic, you know the attitude, so you feel like you have a guy that you can trust in that regard. And then Matt Breida is a guy that I think you know what you're going to get from him on a game-to-game basis in all phases. The other piece that I did just want to mention was the receiving numbers for him, which 20 catches on 25 targets, 118 yards. Again, so this is probably the area out of the two. The rushing yards, maybe the rushing numbers maybe make sense. 50, 60, maybe 65 attempts a year. Okay, you want to be able to spell Barkley. I get that. But the receiving numbers, and this goes for Barkley, by the way, too, because it didn't happen as quickly as I hoped. 20 catches on 25 targets, 118, a 6-yard per clip average. This is just an area where I think this expands dramatically in the upcoming season because I think running something that I would have liked to have seen a lot more of was the two running back set. I love the idea of having Breida and having Barkley in the backfield, and whether you can go either way with it because both of them obviously are capable of rushing and receiving, but just having that option, I really thought was something I wanted to see more of. But again, if we take the conservative approach that installing this new system was going to take time, and now you're thinking about in the second year, how much more will we be able to use these guys? If you're talking 20 catches on 25 targets this past season on 23% of offensive reps, I would hope, even though he's primarily an insurance policy, I would hope to see 30% of the reps when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. And I'd hope to see, depending on what they do with wide receivers, obviously, because getting that core up to speed is going to greatly improve the way you approach your offensive scheme as well. But I'd like this to be a guy. I think that he's capable of being a 35 reception contributor for this team. I think you can do a lot more things, especially when you get a true number one on this roster, saying, hey, if we can stretch that field in the downs when we want to give Saquon Barkley a spell and give him a break. I love the out of the backfield over the middle route for Matt Breida, getting him in space. He's shifty enough, quick enough, and then hopefully capitalizing in some of those. So Matt Breida is the other just note in terms of guys that they've retained around here. Saigai Bry, who was in here at the top of this, Poyer was outside our comfort zone money-wise from the beginning. I agree. We need to re-sign Love. That's the other one, too. They said that that's ratcheting up right now as well. The negotiations and conversations with Julian Love, that's getting closer to getting done. I think they've been talking about something in the $21 million 3-year range. So closer to 7 or 8 than to 10, which is what we had talked about throughout the season, right? We talked about, is it going to be worth it if he's going to the market and you're seeing 10%, something close to 10 million? No, it's not going to be. But if you can keep him closer to 7 than 10, I think you're comfortable with that. And again, reliability, consistency, right? And go back to bringing in Bobby in the inside linebacker spot. Again, Julian Love can benefit off of that in his role too, because he has some safety in him. He has a little bit nickel in him. He has some versatility to his role. And the more improved play you have around him is the more productive that he can be when he's out there utilizing his skill set. How do I feel about taking O'Cyrus Torrence in the first round if there aren't new wide receivers or DBs that we want? We can go down that road here for a second if we want to. I want to talk about, too, because I think, Tommy, you've thrown up some things here, like Cansey out of Pitt. So these are all, you're throwing out some names here for the New York Football Giants when we talk about where they could potentially go. We mentioned this last episode, so let's do it in tandem here. I'll pull up in the background here, speaking on Torrence, and let's just get a look at that as we continue to talk about free agency, where things are going right now. Laundry list of stuff has happened around the league, as we know. And I don't know why this is on my mind, but the Vegas Raiders just continually to pull more expatriate connections in there with Josh McDaniels is just interesting to me. They're going to get, looks like Myers. I don't know if he's already gone there, but looks like he was going to go there. They obviously brought in Garoppolo on a very, very comfortable contract as well. So interesting to see how things unfold there. Let me go ahead and pull this up real quick in the background. And it's funny too, I talk about 30-35 just to round this out. 30-35 receptions for a guy like Breida would be a career high for him. And looking back, right? Rookie year, 16 games, 21 catches on 36 targets. I think the thing that I really like is 27 catches in his second year, 2018, on 31 targets. So obviously, really making the most out of his opportunities. 261 yards, and that's that's more too. 118 for in the receiving game last year. And then when we talk about the rushing numbers, 220. So, I mean, listen, he ends up being a guy that contributed 340, 350 yards. Again, it's funny. You take the step back, and the productivity was certainly there in a larger way than maybe you realize in the moment, because the season's long and because Saquon had really monster performances, and you don't necessarily catch it the same way. Again, go back to that loss against Philly in the playoffs. 4 catches, 23 yards, catch 19 yards. Like, that type of weekly stat line can start to lead to some productivity, even if we want a couple more targets. And just worth noting here, as the reminder, 9 attempts in that second to last game of the season against the Colts, 59 yards, right? Only had the 1 reception in that game, but then he followed it up against Philly with 7 receptions on 8 targets, right? So we're talking about 60 yards of production on the ground. We're talking about, what was his yards on that? Oh my God. Well, we're only talking about 12 yards. So think about that when he had the seven catches, 8 targets, 12 yards, right? But it skews the numbers here, right? Taking away 7 receptions off of his stat sheet all of a sudden makes it look a lot different, even if the yardage over 100 is pretty good for him. That being the case, though, let me pull up in the background here. Let's go. I guess I can go with ESPN's big board, because there's a couple of things I hinted at. I mentioned yesterday about where this board was headed in terms of the post combine and how it was going to impact the Giants. So we were talking about Deonte Banks, who had a phenomenal combine and really makes it hard to think that he's necessarily going to be there at 25. It's possible, but I don't know how likely it would be. We also saw that mentioned there. Let me dip back into our scroll here just so I get it right. Tommy was talking about, as you get down there towards 25, and some of the names that we've seen kind of go there. Right now, Banks is literally on ESPN's big board right there at 25. If we scroll up the board, there have been other names getting mentioned. How far did he fall, actually? Depending on which board you look at here, you get a different one for the Kentucky product. I didn't see him listed as high up on this big board as you would have thought. The interesting thing to me, just from a positional value as the offseason unfolds here and free agency unfolds, is certainly, even just in just making the signing at the linebacker position, it's going to change now where you look at it. Now, interestingly enough, I think, Tommy, you mentioned one of the names in here being Henley as a possible target there. When I've done the mocks, I've gone through and said, 89, 100, 128, 162. That was usually where I was in terms of the linebacking room, for no other reason than at 25, the optimism was Banks, get that cornerback, lock him up. Or, as it looks like now, you can start to look at the wide receiver room, even though from a fit perspective, I like some other players as we get down there. I've mentioned Rashee Rice before. I've mentioned Jonathan Mingo, who I think is going to really move up the board here, or at the minimum, I like him at a value where they're talking about him in the 150s. I think it gets up to the 130s, the 120s as we get towards the draft, because of how good he looked at the combine. I think by the end of this, you can sit here and say he's a guy that if you wanted to take him with the second compensatory pick in the 3rd round, I would have no issues with that. I'll be fascinated to see where he goes. But so positional value, offensive line, right? I want an interior offensive lineman. I don't love any of the value that you'd be talking about at 25, but I love value you can get at 57. Mentioned the center position specifically there. We know Nick Gates went to a division rival with the Washington Commanders, which, by the way, people had said, don't discount the guys that have been here. It's not about discounting them, but I say this every single time. I want to elevate the floor of this roster. I want more consistency, more reliability. Nick Gates has been great when he was here. We love just kind of the story of it, the comeback. We love the grit that he played with. But so much of that is predicated on the fact because the expectations were low. I want to have a guy that I can rely on with consistency at key positions. So if I look at this, we see what happens in free agency here. If they go get a wide receiver on the market here in a trade, or looking at a DJ Shark, I mentioned him, seeing how these contracts play out and whether or not they can get involved on these conversations, then you turn around and say, wide receiver still a big need. Offensive line still going to be a need. But if I can move that back a little bit, maybe I can start to look at some other names, including the first one that you're mentioning there. Sorry, I said that wrong. I think I said Kentucky. Cansey out of Pitt is a guy who could certainly be there for the Giants at 25 and would be a different way to go that high in the draft. But I can explain all the ways that he has value. He's not the same big body guy you might want, but he has the high motor. He has the ability to get off of offensive linemen in a hurry. And there's some versatility about where you can line him up and say, you can be a guy that can get after the quarterback with some size and certainly with some strength. He showed that off at the combine as well. I have another guy in that vein that I do want to talk about at some point, if not today, coming up here. Okay, let me just touch back in here because I saw some mentioning of a couple different players. So I want to try to figure out. There we go. I couldn't find it there. You were mentioning that was the one. Torrance at 25 out of Florida. ESPN's big board puts him at 36. Let's do this in an even better way, though. I'm going to go over to Draft Buzz. This player, by the way, like I did a little bit of highlight watching on him. Also did a lot of reading up just on the write-ups around him and where they think that his skill set is. This was a like, don't love kind of player. And for me, I'd be saying something like, I don't think that that's the value there at 25. There's a trade back scenario where you say, can you drop from 25 inside the first round, still get your 5th-year option on however you select, and then maybe pick up an extra pick that gives you flexibility to go and target somebody. But me personally, I don't love him. Doesn't mean that I would scoff or turn it away. When you go and look at where he is now, he's 11th on Draft Buzz's big board, but 28th in terms of average draft position. It's interesting, man. He's an interesting one to me. I'm not even going to formulate any concrete opinion around him at 25 in this moment. I remember looking initially, seeing him, reading write-ups, looking at a little bit of tape and saying, I'm not convinced that that's the value that I want in the first round, but I'll go back and look at it a bit more here, and then I'll revisit that. And that was from you, right? Yeah, I wanted to make sure, King. So I'll take a look at that here today and going into tomorrow, and give a real thought on it before I shoot it down or confirm or deny it. Tommy coming in hot and heavy with A.T. Perry. Yeah. So these are all good wide receivers, guys that I like that you're listing here. I like A.T. Perry, excuse me. The size is the concern with Nathaniel Dell, obviously, but he looked every bit of the player that you saw on tape at the combine as well. I wonder if the Giants are hesitant about that, but he is an electric player. He might be the kind of guy when you talk about big boards and he's there at the edge of the top edge of the second round and maybe he falls based on his size and some of those measurables. That's like a falling talent. There's been plenty of mocks where I get to 89 and he's still there. And that's a really interesting question, like to be asked of any team, let alone the Giants. Well, if this is a guy you consider to be somewhere between 28 and 40, and he's there at 89, how much does that mitigate concerns you have about health or have about being a player that can stay healthy? I don't know, but I love him as a talent. I just wonder if it's the right combination here. Landers, I started to take a look at a little bit here too. Anybody else that you're listing here? I watched Cropper at the combine. I thought it was okay. For me personally. So yeah, there's a couple of guys there that you're listing from a wide receiver perspective that I really like. Anybody else? Let's see here. Let's get down low here for Mr. Duck. Which draft picks from last year do you expect to start this year? Oh, that's a good one. Kayvon Thibodeau. No, I'm kidding. Which guys last year? So assuming health, I want Darian Beavers in, especially now that you put a veteran experienced player there. I would love Darian Beavers to be in that mix there on the inside. I think that that's a no-brainer for me. The skill set is there. Just have to get healthy. Really, really, if you're talking about guys that I was really disappointed that the injury happened and you couldn't see him start to develop, especially with Wink, That's a guy that I absolutely love. You take a look inside the secondary, Flott, you already kind of got the sample size end of the season and going into the playoffs. I think his role is only going to expand here. It's a combination. Now, whether or not you think you can stick him purely on the outside with his slight frame, you saw him be used in a versatile way, got used in the slot at times too. I think that he's a plug and play to be getting consistent reps. You think about Darnay Holmes and what didn't go so well for him this past year. So already there's a spot opening up there. Go all the way to the back with a guy like Dane Belton. Interesting, right? If we're talking about retaining Julian Love, where is his role specifically and how are you going to utilize him? Dane Belton can end up being a guy that isn't starting, but by the end of the season, here's a guy that you're talking about building up his rep percentage. And I think ultimately there has to be some level here, especially if the contract's right on Julian Love, where what you want to see is the continued development of Dane Belton and then let him expand and overtake a role where then you just have this great veteran presence, great experience, and frankly, depth and versatility in the secondary. I'm trying to think back on the offensive side of the ball. So we can debate whether or not that young rookie on the offensive line. Let me get everybody up here for the New York Football Giants, just in terms of make sure that I touch on everybody. I mean, Daniel Bellinger is obviously going to be playing and starting for them. I don't see them necessarily going crazy when it comes to top, first round tight end or anything like that. I think you plug him in there as well. Oh, let's get a look-see here. Who else am I forgetting about as we run down this list? Oh, other guys that I think will play. You know who I think can get some reps here? Jashaun Corbin. I think that he's going to be in line maybe to be up and a part of this roster, assuming that his development this offseason goes correct. Gary Brightwell, holdover. I think maybe you have Corbin jump him there, and then you have the Barkley, Breida, and Corbin lineup. That's not starting, but it's certainly a guy that can be there. Wan'Dale Robinson, be healthy. He'll be starting as well. Mentioned Bellinger. Izudu, that's a big question mark here, right? Clearly had one phase of his game that he needed to work on. Is one off season enough? At this point right now, I would say, again, predicated on the fact that this organization, this regime went out and got him in the third round pick 67, borderline a second rounder. That's a commitment that you're making to this player and believing that he can be a starter. So if I want to be optimistic, he should be starting at left guard, obviously, and then going to the draft and getting yourself a center to go ahead and solidify your going into the season, feeling more comfortable about that. Who else do we have? And by the way, didn't even mention that Nunez, I think it's Roche. I could be pronouncing that last name wrong. Rakeem is going to be in there behind Dexter Lawrence as well. Some people scoffed at the idea, like, we're not going bargain shopping anymore, as Joe Schoen said. Yeah, but you still got to improve it. Justin Ellis was in there last year. It wasn't productive enough. Interestingly enough, they drafted DJ Davidson. I think he was a flyer guy that may need more time to develop. Be interesting to see what happens there, certainly. And did I forget anybody? I'm sure I had to have forgotten somebody. There's almost no way that I didn't. Let me tap back into the conversation here. Who am I missing? Tommy, what are you asking me? I thought would do more this year. I hope he makes a jump, him and Corbin. Oh, yeah. So if we go back over, Corbin was a guy, I will say, and it's not about, expectations being what it is. I was really surprised that Corbin wasn't a part of the roster. He had injury concerns coming out of college. We loved it. Andy and myself loved the measurables there. The other thing that I'll mention here for you in terms of like what's going to happen with this roster when we get through this draft class and thinking about who are starters, I'll go ahead and put a long list of names to keep an eye on that probably, could very well not be a part of this team, depending on how their role gets carved out. A guy like Cam Brown, who was a great special teams contributor, but not able to contribute on the defensive side of the ball with any consistency. Ellerson Smith and his concerns, obviously. Darnay Holmes, obviously. You go all the way back to the, Tony Jefferson veteran. I think he'll still be around. Interesting to see what happens. Fabian Moreau. Jalen Smith, obviously, is not going to be, a part of this roster, I wouldn't think. You're looking to replace him there. Micah McFadden. I knew I'd forget somebody. So I'm talking about Darian Beavers getting back. I think Micah McFadden's the interesting one for me. If you go over, and it's just by ESPN, they quickly updated this, right? Okereke is being listed as the weak side linebacker behind, linebacker edge rusher behind Kayvon Thibodeau. I don't think that that's the way it necessarily lines up. Doesn't mean he can't play out of there. Doesn't mean we won't see scheme switch ups here from Wink. But I expect him to be on the inside there instead of Jalen Smith. And then I think my preference would be that Micah McFadden becomes this versatile player that's there behind Darian Beavers. But that's a healthier group there. And by the way, it's a really important name worth mentioning because Micah McFadden did play a significant amount of reps, and I think he showcased that speed, 6'2", 232, like same type of measurables as we're seeing from Okereke, which is why I think there's going to be this level of which way are we pairing players together here to make sure that we get the right complement, coverage, run defense, range, speed, power, strength, right? All of these things are going to factor in. So I already, just with one signing, love the fact that you can see how you're improving it. Darian Beavers being healthy is about as critical as anything for me to look at this and say, go to the draft, add another name here, maybe within that top 100 kind of range, even down to 128. And all of the sudden, you feel like you have a young with some veteran presence, but you feel like you have some young talent there and guys that can be disruptive on down and distance for you on a week-to-week basis. Let's get in New York, Chris. We haven't heard from you yet. Thank you for being in, man. I'm happy they're building the roster. Any more small moves you think can be made for depth? Oh yeah. There's plenty that I would still look at here. If we're just talking about, where things currently stand. I don't want to back out of this here. I got the old multi-screen going on right now. Let's get a look because while we're doing this, some other things are going on in terms of moves that could get made. So here's an interesting one here. People have been saying like Dalton Schultz. So we talked about him last time. That's not for depth here. This is a guy that we talked about on Spot Track yesterday, $15 million. That's a very big price tag. And we debated the idea of, well, if you're willing to spend that much money in free agency, would you maybe just want to go to the draft and get a young player, fifth-year option control, less expensive? However, if you're going to talk about Dalton Schultz, what an absolute stud addition that would be. Great in both fail. He is a very prototypical kind of Giants tight end. He's going to do an excellent job helping in the blocking game. It's going to free up Daniel Bellinger. That's more of a big swing. But I certainly would love if the Giants made a move like that. Very interesting for me where that number would come in at. $15 million is a steep price tag. Irv Smith was mentioned by Andy yesterday, and I think that would be talk about depth moves to improve it. If we're not taking a big swing on a Dalton Schultz, Irv Smith being listed at $5 million on the market value. Love an addition like that for the Giants because he can block, because he has athleticism to contribute in the receiving game as well. That to me would be a smart move, more of a shrewd kind of move here in free agency, knowing that you're going to add other pieces and other weapons when it comes to the draft. But I'm going to come back to that here too. Thank you, by the way, Mr. Duck. You did say it. McFadden, I was trying to track it down and I got there. Second center from Arkansas. Let me just take a look there too on that. So if you just want to know where I was when it came to, and I did one mock draft so far, I'll dial up another one, especially by the end of this week when we see some of this free agency dust settles and we have a clearer sense of where the New York Football Giants are. You don't have to go too far for me in terms of finding tremendous value and value that I'm willing to do. And here's the big difference for me. Because I fall in love with guys later in the draft as well. Darian Beavers is an example. Now, I think Darian Beavers was a fourth round value that the Giants got 2 rounds later, right? So I look at him and I think about his impact as being, you're a guy that's a mid-round pick, not a late round pick. So you can find that, especially even with offensive linemen. However, if I'm going to have the conversation around the offensive line, I've mentioned this before. Excuse me, almost got choked up. I am going to get choked up. Talking about linemen, it always happens. Interior offensive lineman for the Giants, it gets you emotional. I want to make sure that I hit the few names here. So the first one is Schmitz out of Minnesota, the center. I've looked at him. That's 45 on a lot of big boards. Average ADP is 45. Going to probably hit that middle ground where you're not going to take him in the first round, obviously, and he's not going to be there by the time you get back to 57. Side note on Nathaniel Dell, he gets listed, and here's what's interesting about him. It all comes down to the measurables. 48 on DraftBuzz Big Board, 70 is his average ADP. So someone it looks like is going to catch some falling value there which is really going to be nice for whoever lands him. Again, the Giants didn't have Wan'Dale Robinson. I would be even more excited about the prospect of that type of player falling for Big Blue. But as you work your way down the list, I mentioned the Minnesota center there, obviously. Then you get all the way down when the Giants start to be talking about picking in that 57 range. And that's where you end up landing on two of them. You got Whippler out of Ohio State, the center, who I like, don't love. And then the guy that I've mocked to the Giants multiple times here that I am a very big fan of. And that's going to be, where did he go? Of course, I'm scrolling right past him here probably at some point. Tripman is the center that I really like. Now I'm going to go back and reconfirm the combine and reset where some of this hierarchy should go. But 57 is not too high for me to go and achieve securing that starter, day one starter for me. And just to your point about, 6th round, I get it. You can find those guys, and I have nothing but faith. Although we do want to have a conversation about where did decisions that Joe Schoen made last year in the draft, how do we look at those now? How did they grade out? Right? Because it's hit or miss, by the way. That's a part of what the draft is. Getting a guy in the 6th round can get me excited. My concern would be the center position now has been a revolving door in Daniel Jones's first 4 seasons. I want the guy that plugs in immediately, that starts for the Giants, and that develops that, decade-long relationship with the signal caller. So while you can take a player in the 6th round and maybe he can get there, I don't love the idea of going into this season saying we're going to go with another veteran here one more year. We're going to wait for a guy to develop. If you can get the guy that is the day one plug and play starter, especially at the center position, I am willing to commit to that. And you can tell me that you're going to do it on the open market somewhere as well. Back to New York, Chris here. Do you think any wide receiver will get higher contract than Jacoby Meyer? Yeah, where did he was like, being listed as like the best, one of the top available there. Did we get confirmation on where his contract? Did he sign his contract officially? What did that number end up looking like? I can go back and get into my free agency tracker here, but I'm going to get sidewinded in terms of information coming in while also running here. So I will take a look though, and we can dial in on where he went, and I'll also pull up the wide receiver room. The short answer is probably no, and I know there have been some speculated numbers out there. So if we pull up wide receiver, let's go ahead and punch it in. So Myers, they go, okay, 3-year, 33. Right, I saw that reported earlier today. So 3 years, 33 million. Total guaranteed was 21. Will anyone else break that? Robert Woods, he's going to go from Tennessee to Houston. 2 years, 15 million, 10 million guaranteed, 10 million guaranteed at signing as well, with just a 5.5 2023 cap hit, and the potential out 1 year, 8.75 million. So those are the only first ones that have really gone off the board here. Who else do I think? Do I think anybody else will break the $11 million average? Yes. My answer is going to be yes. A guy like Alan Lazard is interesting to me. His market value is 12.5. Just for a comparison there, I think Jacoby Meyer was somewhere around like a 10, like right around what he got, 10 or 11. I think that Lazard is a guy that's going to get paid by somebody. He's an interesting one to watch if we're talking about Aaron Rodgers to the Jets and then wanting consistency. Maybe that's a contract that they end up going in on in order to make sure that they give a familiar weapon to Aaron Rodgers there as well. That would be one name. I don't think that, DJ Chark, who I've talked about, who I actually like the Giants to take a look at here, especially if the market value is right. He was at 9.5. So I think some of it just depends on how desperate do teams get here. And do you get any level of bidding wars going on? Beyond that, Juju Smith-Schuster, I don't think that he's going to break anyone's bank here. His market value is listed at 14.6 though. And he is still only, he's only 26 years old. Like he just basically 26 just turned. Was he productive enough this past year with Kansas City to say that he can go back to the market and cash in? Played 700 snaps, 79 targets, 58 catches, 917. He's almost 1,000-yard receiver in an offense that's very much predicated on, hey, the open player gets the ball here, so it's going to get spread around a lot. They became much more sum of their parts after trading away Tyreek Hill. Excuse me. What else you got here? Late round pick guard Chandler. Yeah. And you know what? Like Tommy, just as I'm throwing these up here as you're mentioning them. Lamar turned down 3-year, $133 million contract. Yeah. The reports I had heard about that while we're just having some fun. And I'll go back in on the draft stuff as far as where I think the board should be for the Giants, where they can find value, specifically on the offensive line. Just to touch on what Tommy's mentioned there about later round picks, whether or not you think they can start or otherwise. Right now, center, absolute necessity. You can say you have a veteran there for one more year, fine. But you need to have a solution lined up. Guard behind Glowinski. I want a guy that's actually there, maybe a little bit of pushing him and having an opportunity maybe to take over that role, if not this year, 100% by next year, because that was a 2-year deal, might have been 3-year for him. So you have two very specific positions of need that later round picks can be looked at as, if not this moment, certainly going forward, we're going to have that option. Before we just talk Lamar, Mr. Duck, if we sign a wide receiver in free agency, what round do you see us drafting one? I don't. So if it's me, and I'll go back to it. Actually, I'll run one of these in the background here real quick. I'll run a little mock draft here just to talk about some of the guys. If it's so, just because you take one, so if you think about it from this standpoint, you brought back Sterling Shepard. That's a flyer to see what happens within this offseason. It can be remotely healthy. If he's healthy, then I'd like him to be the third wide receiver on my roster, which means I want to go to the draft and get a number one guy. Or if I go to free agency and I get a number one guy there, fine. Or trade, which, Jerry Jeudy's being, discussed, rumored, speculated, which I'm of two minds about, but maybe we'll get to that. If I get a number one now, or it feels like a number one now, and I have Wan'Dale Robinson, second round pick, high expectations. Let's assume Darius Slayton's gone, Richie James gone. You have Hodgins too. I still think, though, that you're going to want to go to the draft and say at that point, I wouldn't put anything off the board. For example, if Rashee Rice fell to 57, I would jump at the chance to take him. If you got to 100 and 128, that's where Jonathan Mingo for me comes into play. I think you could go as comfortably back to 128, but just by getting one now and what they currently have, I wouldn't say, oh, we can take a later round pick and develop him. You're not there yet, right? Because even with let's say it was Jerry Jeudy, for argument's sake, they get Jerry Jeudy, and now you have Wan'Dale Robinson, second-year player coming off injury, who you really like, but he needs to be healthy. Bit of a breakout star in Isaiah Hodgins, who is he a legitimate number two? Is he a very high level number three? Okay, so we have a potential number two in Wan'Dale Robinson that has health concerns, a high level three, maybe a nice number two in Hodgins, and we have our number one. That's it. I mean, you have David Sills, and and then maybe you want to bring back Richie James or go to the veteran market, et cetera. Like, okay, but you don't want to find yourself in a spot where you end up taking two late round wide receivers, and then you're saying these guys need to come in and develop and be ready to play for us because they're going to be our fourth, fifth, sixth wide receivers on the roster. The other route the Giants could go is get the high profile guy now, spend a mid round pick, 100, 120. Again, I'll keep just saying Jonathan Mingo. That's who I want them to get. I take Jonathan Mingo at 100. I think you love what his projection is to develop. And then you wait until after the draft. You wait until some other moves get made around rosters. And then you do fill out with veteran players with nice low-level cost contracts that can come in and be contributors. Richie James, for whatever you thought about some critical moment drops, was a darn productive player for the Giants coming in out of nowhere. So you can go find those, and you can find them at very reasonable costs. So I think that's the way that I would start to look at that. Let's get Cy Guy Bry back in here. If there is I would take a cornerback. Yeah. Oh no, 100%. So let's do it. Let's go ahead and do it, guys. You got me ruminating on all this right now. So let's go over to the draft simulator real quick here, and then I'll close this out coming up here in a minute. 1:30, did a nice little hour session, which we always love. And then we'll come back in. We'll continue to talk about it. We'll update things. We'll see where the Giants stand as this moves along. I think there's going to be these wait and sees. Where do contracts go? What players were expecting contracts that didn't quite get them? Maybe the Giants get value buys. So patience here on the market is going to be big. I'm leaning edge or corner in the first round, but there's a bunch of ways Joe can go that I wouldn't be upset. Yeah. So to tap back into what Sci Guy Bry is saying, Chris, and to everybody really, if I could, and I want to make sure that I get make sure we get the good one up here. Okay. So the Giants pick at 25. Let's just run through to the 5th round and we'll call it a day. And we're not going to do this like my mock drafts. Come back around the end of the week though. We will do one of these with a little more detail talking about the players that we can potentially look at, right? So let's go ahead and just fire this thing off. It rips through it, and I have to make sure that it hasn't been updated yet with that trade there from Carolina, which it has. They go with Bryce Young. So if we're just having this conversation, which you know what, frankly, here, let's do this, guys. Let's really dial it in here. Let's have even more fun than we know what to do with. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can really enjoy ourselves. Okay. So let's get in over on the mock draft here. So we're running through it here. You can come over on the side and talk about how you saw it go. So Bryce Young goes, CJ Stroud goes, Will Anderson falls comfortably to the Arizona Cardinals. We get Will Levis going to out of Kentucky going to the Colts. So they get their guys. So 3 quarterbacks in the top 4. Anthony Richardson to the Raiders. That's interesting to me. But you move down the line here. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of key players that you'll see getting mentioned here. Joey Porter Jr., first cornerback that we're talking about being there at 14. See some wide receivers moving here too. There it is right there, my friends. Deonte Banks going at 18 in this particular one. When it comes to the cornerback room, that's really difficult. If he's there at 25, that is my lockdown. I love the pick. It just changes the entire complexion of this secondary and what's expected of the players in front of them. Instead, though, as we move through past that, and there goes Lucas Van Ness, to Seattle. He had a very good combine for himself. Breece had a very good combine for himself as well. I like Nolan Smith actually a lot too. He's one of the guys. I saw some mentions about like maybe I go edge rusher here because even though we like the 2 guys up top, we know we need more. Like we need more depth. We need more ability to move some players around a little bit. And Kayvon Thibodeau, who's certainly big enough, there's worlds where you can keep his hand in the dirt and you want to bring someone around him alongside or be able to keep him on the outside and move along there. There goes the big tight end that some people have been talking about. Mayer, Andy and I said we wouldn't be pro doing that. And now the New York Football Giants are on the clock. So here are some of the things that come up for me at this spot. We see a couple of things. One, there's a trade option. We'll take a peek at that here in a second. Kancey is a guy for me who I really like. And when you look at the rank of 13 and the average ADP being 20, and this is a product of combines and some other guys really moving up the board, this is a guy that at 6 foot 280, I said, not the biggest boy in the world. Let's keep it really simple, though. Aaron Donald's comps will only pick up steam after Kancey broke Donald's record for the 40-yard dash with a 4.67. Undersized with a sub 31-inch arms, but my lord, is he difficult to block. Penetrating 3-technique defensive tackle. So I just, we talk about value, best player available value. I could easily take him here and have absolutely no qualms about that. Let's just quickly take a look at the fact that, yes, there's an opportunity to trade back here, but it comes at the price of leaving the first round. So we're going to ignore that no matter what. But certainly, maybe there's that opportunity. I've seen sometimes Cincinnati Bengals trying to come to target somebody. The other thing we notice is that Zay Flowers, a guy that's consistently been off the board by the time we get to 25. He's one of the players that's fallen. Again, I can be convinced that he is worth that. Maybe the Giants do something in free agency. This is where I wish I had the trade down option inside of the first round to give myself that opportunity. More than likely, other guy that I absolutely love, by the way, was Maisie Smith. This guy I thought was a stud at the combine. He looked every bit of a bulldozer. 6'3", 337. Let's go the other way with the defensive interior and talk about putting in a real big boy that can block it up, man. But when you think about this guy just at the combine alone, 337 pounds, I could not believe how athletic, fluid, light on his feet, he looked, and also was incredibly powerful in all of those. The big one here, nose tackle. True hold the point nose tackle. He won't be much more than a pocket pusher in the passing game, but he has the strength to do just that in the NFL. Hard part for me in a decision like this is saying, like, one-dimensional player, you have Dexter Lawrence. But again, Dexter Lawrence has gone from being just physically looking, right? He was much more of a filled out, big bellied defensive tackle, nose tackle when he first got drafted. He has gotten much stronger up top. The pass rushing has gotten better for him. His ability to penetrate the pocket has gotten better. So it makes for interesting dynamics. I just pointed out because he's a guy that I really liked. Obviously, we can all love BJ Ojulari here as well. Let's operate on the premise that the Giants go with best player available here and that they got the wide receiver in the mix when we talk about the free agency. So they got somebody of substance. Let's just go ahead and let's take Kancey, right? Let's bolster it up. Let's add a weapon, movable piece on that line, and a guy that with his speed, with his strength, you can certainly have different ways to use him underneath Wink Martindale. When we come up at 57, and let me make sure that let me come over here. What are we all talking about when we're talking about? There we are. Couldn't see anybody. Let's pull this down here too. I apologize. If Banks makes it to 25, yes. Again, if he's there, yes, 100%, 1,000%, 1,000 times yes, Tommy. If Banks is there at 25, it is literally, there's nobody else in behind him. And saying Kancey is there, whatever, all these other guys, it doesn't matter. Barring somehow one of the rare top wide receivers ends up down there, which they won't. That's the guy, man. If he's there, I am in love with getting him and what that means. I'm not in love with taking a tight end at 25, not because of the player, not because of how they profile. I just don't, I don't think that you can put that level of value into that position. The value of the fifth-year option, having a fifth-year option on a cornerback, tremendously valuable. On a wide receiver, tremendously valuable, right? So you need to be, at least I think about it that way. We can go full screen here just so we get this as tight as we possibly can. So we went ahead and we took the defensive value there. Now, when you come up at the top of the second round, there is Dylan Henley, who I like. Here's where we start to see Nathaniel Dell get mentioned. And here's where we see Whippler, right? So you have your choices there in terms of what you might want to do. Again, trade options available. You can back ourselves down all the way to 81 if we want to, but there's no world that I'm going to do that. And for the most part, like Garrett Williams, don't love him. I don't think that 57 is too high for me to take him. You want to start to talk about some other players in the tight end room. Maybe, again, I don't believe in that with Bellinger and with some other later round picks that we can do. So again, I come back here to Tippmann out of Wisconsin. He's the plug and play, and he has enough athleticism to move post snap, get out in front, be a lead block pulling at times, get to that second level a bit. So you can go either way here, but I'll tell you what, this is what has been my pattern. So I'll stick with it. And that is liking getting that center taken care of. Now I have my plug and play stud starter. And this is all predicated on, we've gotten that wide receiver in free agency. So when do we go ahead and dip back in? Here's your first kind of conundrum, right? Nathaniel Dell is available at 89. You can start to think about adding more into the linebacker room here as well. There's Michael Wilson out of Stanford. A guy that I thought had a really good combine for himself was Ajomo. I also thought that Jalen Jones looked better for me at the combine than I originally anticipated. And then a guy like this. This is a perfect example. So 89 and 100, you want to talk about finding the tight end value. I really like Schoonmaker. There was a time 2-3 weeks ago when this was a player that you could be talking about getting at 162, getting up back in the 200s just because it's a tight end and it falls. He had a nice combine for himself as well. And now all of a sudden you're seeing his ADP already rise to 123. So this is where these won't grade out well, by the way. Let's do this two ways quickly. Talk about wide receiver. Here's the board that we're looking at. Again, guys that I liked out of there. I know some people mentioned Cropper, obviously. I thought that Xavier Hutchinson had a very nice combine for himself. Currently, 154 on the board, 128 ADP. This is another guy that I don't think that didn't necessarily change anyone's mind in big ways when it came to the combine, but an athlete, bit of a raw piece, but I think can still come in and have an immediate impact, has the speed. I love Iacevas as well. And then we get all the way down to my guy, Jonathan Mingo, who, again, by the way, ranking of 172, average ADP is now 132. In most of these mocks, he doesn't make it to 128. I'm saying all of this to let you know that when you pick at 89, then 100 and 128, you got to make progressive decisions around where these guys are going to be inside of that wide receiver room. So the question really becomes here, the 43rd ranked player in Nathaniel Dell, do you take him here or do you go another direction? Arguably, after having taken lineman and then also center, this is where maybe you do want to look at a cornerback spot. Really good. This guy that's really productive. He's LaDainian Tomlinson's son, but he's 5'9", and that makes it really hard for me to get excited about him. Looked good at the combine. Did everything right for himself there as well. And Dorian Williams is a guy that if he falls, I like him. I don't like his value until like 162 probably, but I have liked the way he profiles as an additional piece. So, I mean, those are some of the things that I look at here as we work our way through it. Again, Luke Schoonmaker here is way too soon. So if we're going to make a decision at 89, by the way, again, Garrett, is a player. Williams is a player that 6 foot 189, won't get any pre-draft testing, continues to rehab his ACL. That was the big one for me too, which is hard to commit to regardless of how good you think he can be. Just coming in with any type of injury history when it comes to the Giants is difficult too. So I'd be in between here about having now signed a linebacker in free agency. I can go right to wide receiver room. I can even take a look at Tyler Scott if I want, because he's a 5'11". I have to go over to the other website for the draft profile on him. He's been consistent. Cincinnati's done a nice job with some wide receivers. Remember, I said Alec Pierce last year out of Cincinnati was one that I wanted, went to the Colts. Very nice, productive rookie campaign for him. I think the Giants missed the mark, maybe not taking a look at him, something that we will review before we get to the draft. That was an accident there with Jomo. All this to say, you only have a couple of picks here to make some really big decisions. So let's just go ahead and look through this, and let's tell our, and Jacorian Bennett, who I actually happen to like too, if he falls down a little bit lower. Let's tell ourselves a story on Tomlinson for just for the example. Let's say that, he's 5'9", he's 180, but we like the fact that he could be a slot, use the slot, but that's also a misnomer due to where that position is trending around the NFL. However, Tomlinson has to be protected from playing press where he can get pushed around. I can't make the draft pick on this here. I don't like him enough anyway. Oh, this is a tough one now. Now I'm in kind of no man's land here. I can convince myself about a Michael Wilson out of Stanford. I thought that he had a good combine for himself as well. Mostly I'm trying to massage my way to a world where we've taken that pick. What do we go to here? I can even make a pure edge rusher here would be a nice combination. Isaiah McGuire is a good one to take a look at, certainly. So let's go. I did because I did this one off the cuff, and now and take a look at us now. Right now we're thinking about 1,000 different ways to cut this pie. And how about a Carl? Let's think about a Carl Brooks real quick here. What do they like about him? 3 technique player, coming in at 300 pounds, another big boy. Again, he lacks the bulk to play the nose and the length to stay on the outside. That's one of the issues there. He needs to get better. He's big, but he's not necessarily fit, not bringing that muscle that you need at that position. Honestly, there's a world where the Nathaniel Dell pick just makes too much sense here, picking at 89, given where his value is. I'm convinced that if I keep just going through this, I'm going to find the right thing at 89 so that I can lay out these next couple of picks for us here, which is absurd because we came in having fun and now we're bogging down. I like Pace here. I like Pace as well. I think he's done a nice job for himself. Byron Young had a nice combine for himself. It's like 3 Youngs in the combine between edge and linebacker. Absolutely, total chaos trying to get that locked down. Let's convince ourselves that Garrett Williams can be that guy and he's recovering. This just makes it easier so we can paint the picture. We got that high value, best player available in the first round. We got our guy there at 57 to secure the inside of the offensive line. Now here for me, this is where if you think the tight end is adding a weapon to this group and you did that one move and nothing else in free agency, so we're talking about having Hodgins, whatever move we make, and then waiting for Wan'Dale Robinson to return, and that's our wide receiver core, then you can go ahead and lock in Schoonmaker for me at 100. I would be fine with that. Would prefer him at like 128. And now here's where you run the risk. I guarantee you, and I should have done that reverse. I already made the mistake in not doing this the other way around, where I would have been more than comfortable taking Mingo. He still makes it there. I draft Mingo at 128 because I think the value is only going to be growing with him. And now we move ourselves down real quick here. This is where, again, Dorian Williams, who falls here, I like him in there. I also like Ajomo falling here, so you can add more value to the defensive side of the ball if you want to. Cam Jones, I thought looked good at the combine too. We're picking at 162. It's the last pick, by the way. If you don't believe in Corbin, or you brought back Breida, so take this away here. But a player like Dwayne McBride really, I think, is just such a weapon that if you want to bulk up on what you're getting out of these guys, really is just absolutely tremendous. Now it says bulk of the carries there. He's that spicy whenever he gets touched with the rock, no matter the run concept. I'll put this out there just so we can wrap this up. As the things don't work out with Saquon Barkley and the tag turns into a trade, much like we're hearing Eckler with the Chargers now being offered the opportunity to go seek a trade as he has a little over $6 million remaining. I don't think that happens that way. But as we look through the grade of it, again, so just really quickly here, best player available in the first round, very easy. Secure your starting center in the second round, very easy. Get a quality player coming off an injury. If you like him enough there, very easy. Now you have your other outside starting corner, and now you give flexibility with Cordell Flott saying, yeah, he's lean, but he's quick enough. We can use him in the slot. We can move some pieces around in that defense. Love the Schoonmaker pick here. Obviously, he's a weapon in all phases of the game too. Frees up Daniel Bellinger. I go right back to the well with Jonathan Mingo. And then if the value was there for a player like this, if that was where things had to go, you could. If not, though, more realistically, I go back to the linebacking core here. Dorian Williams was there. The value would be there in the 160s, and I would really love that. And then, as so many were talking about here when we were having just this open discussion around the draft, then I can turn around and I can get, some guys I want to develop for the interior of the offensive line. I can take a look at linebackers moving forward there, obviously, as well. So there's plenty of options that we can do here. And I'm just looking through some of the things that Tommy's thrown out here. Brooks at 89. He's throwing Henley at 57. Again, Henley I like again, but I'm not. I don't have to. I'll put it this way. For me personally, I'll reiterate it. I want to secure the interior of the offensive line. It has been too long now. And again, we know we got Neal. I'm still very comfortable letting him develop at right tackle. Some people are already saying, kick him inside and then draft another tackle. Don't think it's necessary yet. We know we love Andrew Thomas and what he's turned into. I got it. We have 3 positions on the interior of the offensive line that are still question marks, right? If Azudu develops, fantastic, and he'd be the starter. Center beyond 1 season is not guaranteed, and it was okay last year. Glowinski was okay last year. I can't have 3/5 of my offensive line again be kind of, let's see. I cannot do it. But if you plug in a center there, and anyone could say there's guys later in the round, and I'm not dismissing it. There's guys that I like later, and they could come in and be a starter. Great. But I want to have 3/5 of my offensive line feel like that is a lock, and then I'll go and add these supplemental pieces here. And I think the linebacking core in this draft is deep. There's a lot of opportunities to get quality players there. I think that there are ways that this team can improve on both sides of the ball. So, and this is just an example, if I pull that back up, of saying, again, the ideal here is it's Banks at the top there, and then at 89, you flip that and you go linebacker here, or you look at a wide receiver that may be available that you like better potentially. But what did I do? I helped bolster the defensive front with Cansey. I helped bolster and secure the offensive line with Tripman. I added a player of value, and let's just call it the position of value there for the secondary. I brought in a piece that's a weapon that can work on the line, that can free up Bellinger as well. Brought in another guy that I think can develop into a high-level number 2 going forward at 128. And then I took a weapon here. And again, the McBride one you can move away from. But let's be really clear here. The Giants are probably going to be able to find some value on the free agent market like they just did, bringing in a linebacker and bringing in a couple other veteran players. They need to add a lot of talent to the offensive side of the ball. You committed 4 years to Daniel Jones. Maybe there's an out after 2. It doesn't matter. You committed to Daniel Jones. That means that it's time to take away all of the question marks. So when you go back at last year and you think about the lack of consistency, the lack of players, you can go get a number 1 wide receiver in a trade here in free agency, or add one of those players. Say you even add Lazard, who's not a number 1, but you go out and you add that high profile name that you think can really help you. You're still another 2 wide receivers away. That's how much reconstruction this wide receiver room needs. So I just think that you can't be short-sighted on making sure that whatever you think is going to benefit Daniel Jones the most, whatever's going to help Kafka and Dable really start to get this offense moving and becoming one of the top 10 offenses in the league with consistency, you have to check those boxes. I think out of the 2, that's far more important. Wink Martindale, you give him weapons, you give him playmakers, he finds a way to maximize their value. So I can trust on that a little bit. And we'll do a full mock draft at the end of the week, and I'll show you where I think some defensive value lies and some offensive guys, especially on the line, that I think you can take a look at late in the draft. Hey, everybody. This one, like I thought I knew it would, ran long and strong, obviously. Thanks, man. The big one, obviously, is that the Giants made 2 moves here in free agency yesterday. They obviously added a little bit of depth for the defensive line there just to improve it over Ellis. We're happy about that. It's a player. It's good. But then you go in and you add that interior inside linebacker primarily, gives you some coverage options, gives you great run support. Really important for the Giants to check that box. A 4-year, $40 million deal with a guy that's just entering his prime. So I think you may not have looked at it as the sexiest move, but I think it was a very smart move by the New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen, because it helps mitigate how much pressure you're put on any one position when it comes to the draft. Want to see them make some marginal moves here as we go forward. As things break, I said this yesterday when we did our show. I really wanted to, and yeah, just in case, like A.T. Perry at 100, I think that would be certainly a very much a value pick there with him falling to that point if that were to be the case. I said this yesterday. If news breaks, we're going to come in. I plan on coming back in yesterday, but the Giants took their sweet time getting to the part where they actually made the move in free agency, so it wasn't really worth it. We'll monitor what goes on here, and then we'll do it again tomorrow morning, most likely, if not sooner. Something happens here, we'll, of course, dial it back up and break it down, but otherwise, we'll come right back into tomorrow morning, discuss any moves that happened here, and then also, because we didn't do it as much here, take a bigger look around where players have gone around the NFL, what teams are improving themselves, where the contracts are going, and how thin some of these position groups on the free agent market are starting to get for Big Blue if we think they need to make a move at position X or position Y. That being the case, though, the things that you can do to help us out, go over to YouTube. If you're already subscribed, you have to be, because you're in here. You're having the conversation. I also think that we can, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw this up here. We need 2 wide receivers. There you go. Side guy Bry. Exactly. So you get the high profile going for guy in free agency, still need another one in the draft. Now it changes when you take them, but you still need them. Obviously, if you're in the room, you're most likely subscribed. Have your alerts turned on. Make sure you get notified when we go live when our episodes premiere. Go get us on the podcast feed as well. Tell your friends, quite frankly. It's free, man. Spread the word. This is the full-time gig. This is the full-time endeavor. So really want to continue to grow this thing and bring as much coverage, as consistent and as insightful as we can possibly do. And every little bit of support helps us. And we always greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it. You do those things for us. You stick around and keep watching those waiver wires, or free agency wires, and what's going to happen next. And in the meantime, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, as always, demand the people know. Let's go Big Blue.